whence does the Hylian wind blow? Is it not but a kiss from a distant gust of a dragon's wing? Soft and gentle are the subdued gales from Lanayru's majestic flight. Beneath the gentle wind, a girl walks along Lake Hylia's shores, parting the tall grass with her old boots. She moves slowly along. Those boots have walked collectively farther than years the small feet in them have lived. Her steps are spontaneous, yet methodical in nature. The old leather crunches as she goes. In submission, the common reed grass bows to her path. It pads her feet. Here, it is wet and the air is moist. Water seeps between the dense blades of grass in every squishy instance of pressure under her weight. Each step she takes, her pace slows a little for each new thought. Her hand is open. It opens as if to greet any and all touches and sensations that may accommodate her wanting stimulation. The tall flowers and taller grass reaches out to be greeted by a fleeting touch. They are soft. Beauty saturates the night air, though melancholic in tone. It's cold. There it is. The breeze rises again. It kisses the face of a girl in trance. She takes a breath of the wild once more. It is feeling soft and gracious to the senses. All the same, she walks, methodically, unconscious of direction. Aside from the enveloping feelings around her, Kilaria is greeted by unique scents and odors adrift in the air. It is widely accepted among Hylian biologists that certain smells can influence a person's memory and mood. The link forged between smells and memories are among the most powerful. And so begins the internal wrestle with the mind's attention. Rapidly, her bright blue eyes shift downward to one side, thinking of a current ethical dilemma. And now, in the same moment, they move to another. Oh, how that neotenous blue shining gaze is disarming. Plants and algae produce a musty, earth-like odor. They are young. The lake had been nearly emptied, she remembers, in the stories not long ago. Life under and above the lake now flourishes. Even the tektites, crustaceans the very same, skip along the water surface in the distance, mingling with the smell of water, an herbaceous aroma and the smell of dry straw left over from removed grain and chaff floats in the air.
That must be the nearby scarecrows,
she thinks to herself, smiling. They smile back. Perhaps if she sang them a song, they'd remember it. All this beauty around her still, she walks gracefully and methodically, unconscious of direction. An impeding decision weighs down Kilaria's heart. The weight makes it hard to walk. Momentum alone carries her forward. Her lips gloss in the moonlight while manifesting a nostalgic smile, briefly, now and again. Unsettling is the sounds in her mind because she struggles to break free her abstinent focus. Small lapping tides attempt to reach her. Trapped in conflicting thoughts, the introspection is agonizing. Water nearby whispers swooshing sounds of comfort, to no avail. Somewhere, maybe from the water, perhaps from the shore, someone gently composes an ambient melody designed to just meet the range and frequency that lies in the heart of human hearing. First to approach Kilaria's ears are notes plucked softly, spaced just right. The notes reflect the indigenous life on the lake as they rise and drop familiarly to the rise and drop of a boat on the water. When accompanied by another stringed instrument that has a bow drawn over its strings, the marriage produces a floating, exploratory rhythm. Her eyes delicately close as the music begins to soothe her restless spirit. Emerging from the melody, what first sounded like birds, at night no less, appears to be children laughing. Young children splash and giggle in the shallow water, young Zoras too. It restores her memory. Long has it been since she last laughed. Kilaria smiles, and soon, I'm sure, her story will lighten up. But for now, the responsibility bestowed upon her weighs down her grin, cheeks frigid and rosy pink. The young ones splash while they play, and almost like a part of an orchestra, a new sound emerges. The deep bass-like water plops of fish surfacing to hunt small insects. Crying out, insects chirp and hiss in the night, though the stridulation of some will be their last. Others will find mates. Sunset fireflies glow gently in the dark above the lake, and frogs leap from wet stone to wet stone, slapping them with their webbed feet while they croak. Still, Kilaria walks mindlessly, unconscious of direction. Softly, Kilaria continues to touch and feel clustered flowers as she walks by them. The smooth sensations and pretty colors calm her trepidatious thoughts. In the night, the lake reflects dark gray-blue. Soft whites and grays from the moon soften the darker hues. Though in the sunlight, grass here is freshly lit and bright green, but at night it sometimes appears a dark neutral green. The blades sway with the low wind. If such was a painting, if one was to gaze upon the overall scene, one could describe a gracious to the eyes lavender tone. A little ways down, she notices a dilapidated, rotting brown and black lake house. Weakened by many years of water, the wooden structure creaks and moans to the push and pull of the lake's ebb and flow. Kilaria's pointed ears perk to the sound of a zipping reel. For a moment, she is distracted from her urgent and unrelenting rumination. Against the moonlight sits a man. Just at the edge of his wrap-around veranda, he overlooks the lake with a fishing rod in hand.
With this here sinking lure,
the man utters.
Mama, you gonna be alright. I'ma get you a nice 10-pound Hyrule bass. And oh boy, along with some spicy peppers and the raw meat from earlier, I reckon you'll have yourself a fine spicy meat and seafood fry.
Watching and listening, Kilaria continues to walk, unconscious of direction, adjacent to the lake. In response to the man, a person coughs loudly. From the sound of it, there's a lady inside who is sick. It's the bad kind, too. Mucus captured in her lungs is forced to the surface in a gargling mess.
I know you're cold, Mama, but the spicy meat will warm you right up. And the Hyrule bass, when cooked real good, will hardy you right up.
His assuring words bring a reluctant smile to Kilaria. Her eyes meet with the ground.
Will they take it?
Kilaria negotiates with herself. Almost on cue, the mother says to her son,
Did you hear about the voice from the sky?
Her voice cracking and waning. Kilaria pays close attention to their words.
I did, Mama,
he replies.
You stay far away from that monster. Promise me.
Mama says from inside the house, presumably bedridden. Separated by a window, only the sound of their voices connected them.
Don't forget.
She warns her son, before an abrupt, violent fit of coughing halts her speech.
I know, the Utan family.
Her son reassures her.
so many others as well. That monster in the clouds is cruel and merciless. Don't you think otherwise? When that flying creature thought they had what he wanted...
She struggles to resume talking.
He burnt their farm to the ground looking for it. We don't need that trouble here. I speak with great sadness that our community just isn't the same anymore. Nevertheless, what ought we to do? That's just life, I reckon.
I know, Mama.
The man says while tossing his lure back into the lake for another go at it. Kilaria hangs her head low. Indeed, honesty creeps into her heart like an unwanted guest, revealing to the forefront of her conscience that her spontaneous decision to walk along the shores of Lake Hylia was not only to think up an alternative to her dilemma, but to somehow, maybe, rid herself of this blue, time-eating curse within her satchel. Still, passing the house she walks, filling with dread, methodically and unconscious of direction. There is an observation of humankind, she imagines. When confronted with a set of equally dreadful decisions, sometimes we can become stricken with indecision. Previously, she was certain of her motivation to confront the voice in the sky. Now, she has become unsure. This new state of mind is predicated on her late observations of the potential consequences of her self-interested actions on those who call Lake Hylia home. Conceivably, she fixates her thoughts. An apt point of reference for such an anthropologic theory of the observation of humankind with regards to indecision would be the Triforce left behind by the goddesses Din, Nehru, and Feor. The Triforce adheres to the rule of three, in which we base many of our assumptions of mathematical equations and philosophical methods of reasoning. Power, courage, and wisdom, she remembers, are the three pieces left behind of a relic to grant a yearning wish, and a fourth, an ultimate variable brought into reality by its steward. Kilaria is concerned with this concept. When lacking courage, sometimes this produces an anxiety-induced coma. Kilaria's thoughts are not so elegant, though she is learning through meticulous consideration that, as the deadline rapidly approaches, it becomes harder and harder to choose a path. Her imagination with such things is often unclear and takes a while to form, if at all. She struggles articulating her thoughts, but that's okay. Listen, in this dilemma, and those alike, there is often a decision that will cost a piece of one's self, a sacrifice, in order to reunite with something once lost, a desire, an ideal, a loved one. However, bystanders who are innocent but around the one making the costly decisions may face a worse reckoning for one's actions if not handled delicately and or responsibly to relieve all possible ruination. Kilaria continues her excruciating train of thought, or something that amounts to this in her own way. Still, differently, one can choose to escape their situation, avoiding confrontation, maybe never to obtain the thing or goal they once lost or lost sight of, but now they remain stagnant, undeveloped, without sacrifice, without being made whole. They are inevitably doomed. But, of course, those involved around them may still suffer, yet less than the worst way. With this choice may come a lack of wisdom, which is the second tenet of the Triforce. Finally, the weight of her imagination becomes too burdensome. Her feet stop in their tracks, her chest too heavy. She inhales, lungs filling with stress. She exhales. Is this, she considers, the feeling of true loneliness? The air turns bitter. Kilaria always had someone to talk to. Her father before the fall, her mother before she passed, her adopted brother before he was lost, and Ragnarok through it all, the water of the lake, black before the night sky.
Are these my only choices?
She converses with herself, her voice tight with anxious apprehension.
Is there not another way?
Kilaria, hypnotized by the lapping currents, remembers a melody.
Time passes, people move.
She recalls a parable spoken long ago.
Like a river's flow, it never ends. A childish mind turned to noble ambition. Young love will become deep affection. The clear water's surface reflects growth. Now listen to the serenade of water to reflect upon yourself.
Maybe it is herself, she wonders, and her alone who must bear this burden. The third law of her situation may dictate, do nothing for too long, and all may suffer in the worst extent imaginable. Perhaps for the first time, Kilaria is learning of these harsh truths. Tonight, she's grown a little. Almost supernatural. It is the mystery of the human consciousness to self-evaluate, in some ways generate a mitosis of thought, and become greater in dimension and existence than the sum of its biological material. A little ways down the lakeside, Kilaria's long contemplation begins to manifest a clarity of mind. Moment by moment, she structures a tower of reason to support her new decision. That new decision will require her to confront the voice in the sky.
There's too much to gain,
She thinks,
and too much to lose if the opportunity is not taken.
and what is about to happen, what she is about to remember, will fatefully encourage her in that direction. Kilaria's face lights up, figuratively and literally. Warm blue light embraces her. Crouching down, she cups a flower in her hands. It silently glows. You can see the flower reflected in her bright blue eyes. How sneaky. Her cheeks rise, lifting her bottom eyelids just a little. The bridge of her nose crinkles and her brow raises. Along her path, she found a glowing flower. It distracted her from her thoughts. It was a silent princess flower. Immediately, she had scampered over, skipping a step.
It is next to impossible I would find a silent princess near Lake Hylia.
She writes to Dodopi.
I, nonetheless, stepped over one. Still, it is written they grow in the wild near great fairy fountains, so it is possible one is hidden here somewhere. These flowers are known to heighten awareness in those who ingest the plant as an ingredient, thus making one more sneaky. Because of this known property, it has been harvested by Sheikah for centuries. Sadly, Hylian botanists predicted decline in this flower. They don't know why. All we can hope is the species will be strong enough to prosper on its own.
She was sure to keep it brief, and had nothing more to write. In that moment, the pulsing flower begins to conjure memories lost in time. A ghostly, distant baby horse's neigh echoes in Kilaria's mind. This one memory, however, is a story of a birth. The birth of a foal named Ragnarok. One day, many years ago, she remembers, herself sitting at a window. The sun was gleaming in. The warmth enveloped her gently. It always felt as though her mother had just brought in a thick blanket that had been drying in the hot sun and laid it upon her carefully. The morning dew sat on the windowsill, still crisp from the night before. It was not yet taken up by the sun. And there, Kilaria rested her head on her loosely closed hand, bracing herself with her arm against the window frame. She was perched on the ottoman, one leg hanging off. It swung freely with a mind of its own. Kilaria often liked to sit there. This time, like many others, she would imagine a large dragon elegantly floating through the air as if it weaved and snaked through the wind. Her hand moved like a wave, mimicking the imagined movement of the dragon. She often had thought about the spirit dragon of courage, and how it guarded and served Ryola Spring, which was the spring of courage above Floria Falls. Many would visit Shodasa's shrine and pray to the dragon that they may have a jolt of his electrifying courage. Though Kilaria at that time, as young as she was, felt she was already filled with plenty courage, as it were. A fairy fluttered past the window. It distracted her from her daydream. Her eyes blinked and then focused on the little creature. The forest fairy circled back. Perhaps it was curious toward the equally curious Hylian behind the clear glass. Kilaria was always excited to see fairies when she was younger. The natural sight of a fairy was a rare thing then. During the long 7-year reign of the Dark Lord Ganon, many fairies hid themselves and sought refuge in magical springs known as fairy fountains. Those who didn't were either enslaved by dark magic or slaughtered like insects by evil creatures, monsters, and creepy things alike. Eventually, as the prophecy foretold, the hero of time returned to vanquish the evil King Ganondorf. When the Master Sword slain the beast Ganon, all the poison was violently withdrawn from the land and the curses lifted. Even so, the land remained scarred and sick for many years after. Soon, Hyrule began to heal, and fairies started to trickle out of their magical fountains to speckle the world with their glow once again. They glowed with all sorts of colors: pinks, greens, yellows, purples, and blues, and every color in between. They most like to come out in the springtime when it is warm and full of love. This fairy was light blue, similar to the one called Navi from the stories Kilaria loved so much. She was excited to see the little sprite because it was unusual this late in the summer, just a few days from the fall season. This prompted her thoughts to change, again. September was just around the corner, and on the Yoru family farm, that meant harvest was soon. Through the window, Kilaria could see the rows of green pumpkins beginning to turn orange. They were only a few weeks away of being ready. This year was, again, a special year, she remembers, and she was very enthusiastic about the forthcoming yield. She's excited because this harvest would be the third harvest in the third consecutive year the land produced any crop. And maybe she remembers thinking, this year would too produce more squash than the previous, like the one before it. The amount of seeds she would collect for her slingshot was so much, she could hardly contain her joyful glee. Because the soil remained sickly for years after the beast was slain, much land in many regions around Hyrule continued to lay barren for a long while. A year or two would pass without any pumpkins at all, sometimes a few, sometimes more. Once before, the Yoru pumpkin farm grew pumpkins twice in 2 years, but never thrice in 3. But this would be the year the land became fertile again. Close enough anyway. While inspecting the pumpkin patch from the farmhouse later that day, Kilaria noticed her brother outside tending to the garden. It was now evening, and Daedalus had not yet finished his chores for the day. Yet Kilaria had finished her chores suspiciously early and rested inside in comfort. This is simply because she did not do her chores that day. That happened to be Daedalus who did. Daedalus was not a Yoru. Kilaria wouldn't have it. He certainly was not her brother by blood or by choice. Originally, when the days were good, there was her father, Ordana, named after the light spirit who watches over the Ordon province, her mother, Telma, and of course, Kilaria. It was not so long before Daedalus joined the family, that Kilaria was reaching the age of individuation, as many Hylian children traditionally do. She and her father were inseparable for the time that they had. He loved and cared for her more than most fathers or even mothers do, which is saddening to say when thought about concerning all other children. He was gentle and kind, and never raised his voice when instructing her in wellness and good doings. It is a natural thing for a daughter to be closer to her father until the age of menarche. Over the next several years, Kilaria would have traditionally began to seek wisdom from her mother and grow close to her. Then, lastly, she would gradually separate again, but this time from her mother, in order to form her individuality through to adulthood. But, as a regretful and bitter outcome, this never came to pass. Her father died, tragically and suddenly, breaking the family structure and injecting great grief and loss into the little girl's life. The ritualistic individuation process in the young Hylian was doomed to fail from that day forward. Among many disheartening, pain-induced behaviors, Kilaria became disruptive and rejected familiar norms set going forward by her mother. Telma felt the only choice was to be both a mother and father for her child. Perhaps, even in great love, this decision would prove insufficient and sometimes worse, infuriating. This put strain on the relationship between Kilaria and her mother. The bond that was to form and the closeness they would share never took shape. With half the love, care, and attention, Kilaria developed a pattern of exploitation. Soon after, Daedalus was adopted into the family, which made the whole endeavor even more strange. From the very time Daedalus was grafted into the family, Kilaria was not kind to him, nor did she suffer his presence without something to gain. The way she looked at it, there was a finite amount of care and resources that her mother, Telma, could provide now that the family was cut by a third, and she was not willing to share, not such as a little. In the mind of a child, as Kilaria was, this reasoning was much simpler and perhaps rudimentary and naive. It was, in fact, the case that by adding an extra set of hands, their productivity doubled. Nevertheless, from the beginning, Kilaria began her mistreatment of Daedalus. Not always are misdeeds such as these and the impetus thereof as clear as these words are now. Without a song of time to set back the clock, these callous behaviors manifest themselves without anyone's anticipation or foresight to protect against them. It began small and subtle, like with her mother. Kilaria, through an instinct she had not known its origin, was able, at the start, to persuade Daedalus to surrender to her his weekly rupee allowance. In fact, these subtle manipulations already had been tried and tested, and continually so on her mother Telma since the dawn of her failed traditional coming of age. Her words had become cunning. They were sharp, piercing into Daedalus's mind and heart. He was but a lamb, helpless to defend against the magic spells she would utter. So it was that he perceived Kilaria as his baby sister. And she was, by the vow of their mother and by all accounts in the village. Though Kilaria's sophistic words had no true enchanting power, his mind was spellbound by his own chains of self-doubt, fear, and selflessness. With a little more rupees than Kilaria would normally find herself with, she often used them to buy many small things. A doll, perhaps, woven together with deku twigs and thread produced from the fibers of bark from trees. She already had one resembling Link, the hero of time, and one of Zelda, the goddess Hylia. The cloth used to cover them were sheared and knitted from the sheep's wool from Ordon village. a little ways east of there. Ganon's wooden crafted figure was much harder to find, and would cost her a relatively larger amount of rupees, for none would dare craft an effigy of the likes of the Dark Lord in fear of summoning some great evil. Kilaria was not afraid of this, however. After all, she relied on the figures of the heroes to protect her against a doll of their kind. Dolls and books! She often collected small books, scrolls, and poems of the Legend of Zelda, and of the hero who's taken many names throughout the ages. Her favorite story was that of the Skyward Sword, which was forged into what was declared the Master Sword. There were some written stories that were much too expensive for one farm girl's allowance, such as the tale of the Minish Cap, that was harder to find, as not many were rewritten for preservation. But for the stories she did have, she read repeatedly and never got tired of hearing the tales told. And of the stories not written, she would hear from her mother, who had heard odd things, scary things, and mythical things spoken by travelers from all over Hyrule. In the span of about a year, since Daedalus was reborn into the Yoru family, the self-interested influence Kilaria had on him worsened. The village was getting smaller. There was a time that the pumpkin farm became too constricting. After the farm had become too small, the village, from the creek formed by distributaries that trickled from Floria River to the Faron Gorge, which was border to border, did suffice. But for a while. It then came to pass that not even the comforting embrace of the trees around her village could keep Kilaria contained and content. She had to see what was beyond the trees. As she grew, however, it would prove to be futile, as she never did make it past the Faron border, and only just. But she had to try, and Daedalus helped her do it. When the urge became too great, Kilaria would sneak out to venture beyond the village borders, but not before having an audience with Daedalus. There always had to be a conspiracy, a secret, a yet unwilling collaboration in the shadows. Many times she would use phrases such as,
"If you only cared about me,"
and other such things as,
"You know, that's not very selfless of you, Daedalus."
If necessary, she'd pout, distort her lip, and mimic the local baby monkeys who reside in the temple to the north. Maybe deep within, Kilaria could recognize her behavior was un-Hylian, but nevertheless she pursued her nature. Knowing that Daedalus was abandoned by his mother at Faron's Spirit Spring, she utilized this to her advantage. Her words were carefully constructed to invoke a fear that their mother would blame him and his presence for Kilaria's destructive habits in the end. Destructive insomuch as her lies and deceit. After all, Daedalus recognized this was the only path to avoid the shouting that inevitably followed. She forever hung the threat of abandonment above him like a guillotine ready to crash down. Furthermore, she had him believe that the deceit he held secret was to bring about a healing he wished for the family, that the excursions Kilaria went about were therapeutic, and perhaps they were. Eventually, to the dispirit of Daedalus, her behaviors became worse yet. Kilaria became comfortable with their collusion, howbeit one-sided.
"He's not so bad,"
she thought after some time. The day came, the same previously remembered, that Kilaria was sitting at the window of the family house, humming a catchy tune. She bounced her leg to the 3 rhythmic bumps in the melody before dipping her playful voice to continue the tune. There, she thought about many things. Into the sky she daydreamed. Her eyes shifted downward, becoming aware of a fairy that floated by. Coming into focus was Daedalus, toiling under the Hyrule sun. He was thoughtful enough, with all things considered, to help Kilaria with her assigned farm work for the day. Or at least, help was the term she used. Howbeit, what was inferred in service rendered was Daedalus assuming all the responsibility for her chores that evening. Kilaria did indeed recognize the importance of language and how words should be chosen carefully to convey one's meaning. But that was the design of it, to spew a smokescreen of language to confuse and frighten him while her desires are implied with Daedalus in great discomfort. Kilaria would embrace different variations of,
Mom would be so proud of you if you did this for me.
That choice of phrase was often accompanied with,
But I'm so little.
now and again. And well, Kilaria needed the help because she was very tired. Tired, whereas she used to spend whole nights fighting off monsters, evil creatures, and beasts of twilight who threatened Faron Woods. These creepy and foul magical things were no more than just fantastic imaginations, but all the real to Kilaria. And she had a vividly courageous imagination. Down by the creek, inside its small basin, the kids of the village began to gather and form small groups. Soft shadows rose while the sun laid itself to rest below the trees. Friends often gravitated toward other friends, familiar faces with others they knew. Very seldom would a wandering child be absorbed into a foreign clique. It was the nature of it all, I suppose. They talked about many things in this communal and sacred place. Secrets were whispered, truths were confessed, spoken so quick and hushed just the same. And so fast, they floated like spirits away and never heard again. Confidential lies and accusations spilled into the stream, and the turbulent, ankle-high running water lapped over the rocks to catch every quieted conversation and carry them away. Aside from the esoteric discourse, they talked openly about fairies and many other things. They spoke of the legends told and heroic tales. Some girls even sang songs, riddles, and poems in reference to Zelda and the hero against the great evil King Ganon, and also the dark one called Demise. Some conversations became so great, they transcended the different groups. Words were thrown and passed over group to group wherever interest was provoked. And further still, sometimes a topic would trend among the children, breaking through the coy borders built of strange and bashful postures. Daedalus came to the creek just moments before the falling sun's light faded away. There was an increase in chatter from the kids close to the stream. Kilaria had been there for a while now, sitting on the basin's top where the grass was soft, her knees up, bent to her chin. She often liked it there. She could watch the kids talk about many things. Every now and again, she would catch a secret or an interesting word or two rise above the rest. Kilaria saw Daedalus arrive and joined the loud chatter below. Her pointed ears perked and her keen eyes sharpened toward them. Everyone seemed to be talking about a magical thing of godlike status.
Across and through the forest,
One kid spoke.
there's a fairy, not like the others.
Another chimed in and said,
Look! You can just barely see the mountain's tippy top over the trees.
She pointed to the west.
That way!
She had just climbed a tall, naked tree and was so high she could see over the tree line. It was true this deity is indeed a great fairy, but is very different than the others. He is patron and god of horses. He is known as Melania. Apart from his name, Melania is a mysterious god. Very few Hylians have claimed to see him. Of those accounts, many were described as visions and dreams. There was an age-old time that Hylians regarded Melania and worshipped him with great offerings of rupees and other precious possessions. Melania was evoked by many, though less and less as time crawled forward. In times past, Horse God Bridge was erected in his honor, and for easy access for offerings, above the previously named Lake of the Horse God. The bridge sat south of Fural Plains and west of Faron Woods. Throughout the ages, it was tradition for stables to pay homage to Melania with effigies of him mounted upon their stables for blessings and goodwill. But generational decay is unforgiving. The ebb and flow of the Hylian religion was a continuous cycle in the people before and after ages of prophecy. This would prove to repeat itself again and again. While the kids talked about such spiritual and religious matters, some would spit out offhand knowledge they recalled hearing from whom they could not remember to gain status points among the groups. Others stayed silent and listened intently. There were even a few who, at that moment, it was their first time they heard of such a god.
He looks like a black girl, a centaur,
one kid shouted, trying to scare the others.
No, that's not true.
Another village child retorted.
But he does has bones that rattle and tap against each other. I heard it was really unsettling.
Many of the girls shivered together and winced aloud at the terrifying descriptions. They didn't want anything to do with the god, or talk about such spooky things. In general, the boys were fascinated by the scary deity and claimed they were not afraid.
I want to see it,
a boy shouted.
Don't be an idiot, Ravi. But you scare like a Deku scrub,
an older kid remarked. Being so rambunctious and wild, many of the boys dared each other to venture up the steep and long mountain road. Every boy spoke boldly, but deep down, not one of them believed they would actually make it up before their legs gave in from the fear alone. Even Daedalus did not think he had it in him to face the great fairy, Melania.
If the stories were true,
he thought. Then there was Kilaria. She stood with her arms crossed, listening to the naive boys and girls talk about the divine creature's appearance, abilities, and frightening powers. She was not like the girls. The stories did not scare her. Notwithstanding, she was not quite so much like the boys, that the topic fascinated her either. She was in the middle, neither frightened nor interested. After all, she thought, it didn't benefit her one bit. It was just fruitless back and forth anyway. That was what she thought. Pumpkin stew is best when prepared with lawn milk.
Those cows do have a special sweetness about them,
Telma always said with an even sweeter smile. She set down a plate bearing a bowl made of pumpkin, which was filled with stew in front of Kilaria. Kilaria looked past the stew, daydreaming again. Then Daedalus received his and said,
"Thank you very much."
Evening had passed, and all the kids said their goodbyes and went into their own homes, not to emerge until first light and well rested. Kilaria and Daedalus sat patiently, politely waiting for Telma to return to the dinner table. Secretly, Kilaria snuck a chunk of potato out of the stew. Daedalus looked at her. His eyes flashed as if he was the one that had done it. She chewed slowly and quietly, cheeks full. Her eyes locked with his through it all, and boasted an ornery expression. If it was ever possible, Tabantha wheat was the traditional type of wheat used in preparation for the Hylian stew. Although it was difficult to procure for those in the Faron region, as the grain was harvested far away, northwesterly, where it snows ferociously and the moose live. One more trip to the kitchen and back. Telma placed her meal down in her spot, and the bread held by her other hand in the middle of the table, save one seat, empty. Sourdough bread was the choice bread that night. Many highly regarded the bread from the Necluda region to the east, near Kakariko village, because there was something about the friendly bacteria in that region that gave more flavor to the flour that seemed more friendlier than other regions, in a manner of speaking. After a short prayer to the gods they pitied, the ones they reverenced, those they feared, and of course to the goddess Hylia, Telma permitted the family to eat. Unlike Din's fire, regular candlelight flame was dim, gloomy sometimes, but alive, with a warm flickering beat of its own. It was enough for Telma, Kilaria, and Daedalus to politely and quietly enjoy their supper together. Utensils dug into their stew, and they softly chewed in delight. Daedalus still had Melania on his mind, and was interested in what their mother had to say about the whole thing. Daedalus interrupted the ambient sounds. He was the first to break the silence. He looked up at Telma, his head still down in his bowl, and was about to utter interrogatively,
Ma,
but stuttered and blushed.
Telma,
He kindly and timidly petitioned her.
us and the other kids were down by the creek earlier today, talking about something I thought was really interesting.
Telma smiled at him, knowing she's caringly told him to call her mother many times. She yielded. Compassionately, she smiled. Maybe this time she'll let this one go. Daedalus prefaced the anecdote he was about to share by reminding Telma of their 2 horses. Like many farmers to help with various farm work, they owned a stallion draft horse and 1 mare mixed with the blood of light riders, which was pregnant and days from foaling. Both sire and dam, father and mother, of the soon-to-be-born foal. Daedalus continued, repeating the things he understood about Melania and new things he had learned that day. It was all very fresh in the mind and intriguing to him. Kilaria looked at him with the corner of her eyes, with a full spoon of stew in her mouth. She was a little perturbed and annoyed, to say the least, at the excessive going on about such a boring topic. She was trying to ignore him.
What do you think about all this, Telma? Mom?
He stuttered again, reading Telma's shifting expressions. Their mother did not find anything about Melania the horse god fascinating, or that he ought to be inquired about in the slightest. She concluded that the deity was something dreadful to be frightened by. From Telma's perspective, Melania was disturbing and malevolent.
Hear this, and know that it is true. The horses in the safekeeping of the Yoru family farm are well taken care of,
she assured the children.
And inviting that abhorrent great fairy into our stable would only invite woe and misfortune if any ill will fall upon our horses. Make no mistake about it.
She used the word great spitefully. Telma reiterated in a simplistic tone, expecting the vocabulary of both Daedalus and Kilaria to be juvenile.
Melania is very scary,
she said plainly.
Don't talk about such frightful things at the dinner table.
And to herself she thought,
or ever for that matter.
But she felt content with what she had said. Kilaria decided then to make her opinion known. She made it clear she did not find this conversation interesting one bit. As if to test Telma's resolve, Kilaria shrugged her shoulders and said,
Well, I'm not scared anyway.
She did not fear the spiritual entity, nor was she interested in talking about the god, nor going up the mountain to see if he even exists. At that moment, Telma outburst in a natural and maternal manner, proactively protecting her children, and forbade them from venturing to Melania Spring.
It's dangerous to go that way,
she pleaded.
The road also is not safe.
With deterring anger and motherly entreat, Telma finally demanded that whether the horse god is real or not, they would no longer speak of him again, that they should not be involved in such dark and abhorrent things. Kilaria was upset by this response. Daedalus saw it in her eyes. She was not irritated because her mother forbade them from mentioning the horse god again, nor even that she was prohibited to do something she presumably wanted to do. It was because her mother implied she was a scared little girl, that she would not be brave enough to look upon Melania. Kilaria was strong-willed and had not yet faced anything she couldn't overcome. It was easy, however, to be brave while protected by the trees of Faron Woods. That much is true, but not self-evident. She could do it. She convinced herself.
Father would have told me I'm brave enough.
Kilaria thought to herself.
That I wouldn't be scared of it. That I could do it.
Kilaria grew emotionally distant, misinterpreting Telma's compassionate, caring, and loving motherly instincts. This had been happening more and more frequently. Telma only wished to shield and guard them both from harm. However, Kilaria took her commands as a challenge.
I am brave enough,
Kilaria declared.
Dad would think so.
Kilaria plopped down into her seat and crossed her arms, pursed her lips, puffing her cheeks after having lifted herself for the outburst. Her mother fell back into her seat, lips unsealed. Telma was visibly saddened. Her eyes grew large with great compassion. She leaned in gently to close the space between them. Kilaria threw herself to her feet, pushing her chair back rapidly. Its legs screeched loudly across the wood floor.
I am brave enough to see my lane if I wanted to,
she yelled. Her voice was rising with her frustration.
Stop trying to act like Dad, because you can't. That's not what he would have said.
In the heat of the moment, Kilaria was riling herself up, battling her own feelings and insecurities. Telma was taken back once again, braced against her chair, unable to find any words to combat the long-since building resentment in her daughter. If only a word, she thought, any such magical word that would diffuse her suffering and compounding turmoil. A feeling of shivering helplessness swept through Telma and overwhelmed her. These eruptive episodes appear to be getting worse. Daedalus sat there, silent, focused on his stew. He felt as though he absorbed every bit of emotion each of them spilled out and all over the room. He shivered. Feeling she had nothing else left to say, her face contorted and scrunched angrily, and she suddenly turned and moved swiftly towards her room. Telma shouted her name,
Kilaria!
Fruitlessly commanding Kilaria back to the table. Kilaria's door slammed shut. The clap of the wooden door against the sharp frame echoed through the house. A moment of silence passed. Telma stared blankly forward, her neck and head paralyzed, frozen from the tension within her. She breathed short, stressful breaths. No, not a single tear, nonetheless with great effort. She looked at Daedalus with just her eyes to see if he was all right. He saw her frame a fleeting smile that translated into, "Everything's fine." He frowned, with much sympathy, because he did not think that was so. Indeed, and that it was not.